Consider approval of minutes from June 11th, which are not available, so
I move that we table the...
table. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Everybody in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Slow down, Brian.
We got someplace to be.
That's correct.
Who seconded,
Okay, number 3.
Who seconded those minutes?
I did.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we'll move on to 3. Consider C3 commercial design review, reference 128 West Water Street, Amundsen Clothing, exterior painting and restoration. Mr. Hadley here.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
This is primarily
Colors.
just a color change, no facade work's being done. And I outlined the code provisions there for you. I know we've had lots of conversations over the years about the Commission's review of colors, but there are no changes other than updating the colors and putting fresh paint on the building. So, but the code sections there, Chapter 15.04, Standards for Review, Item G, Color. My interpretation of the codes do instruct that this Commission has a review of those colors when they're changed. So. And you have a palette there in your packet that shows. Well, I'll move to approve.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, not hearing any. Barbara?
Aye.
I'll say yes. Joel?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Stan?
Yes.
And Tony?
Yes.
Motion passed. Okay, consider C3 commercial design review, reference 418 West Water Street, Northeast Iowa Monastery School signs.
These are two signs, again, per 1796 of the code. Signs come review because they changed the facade of the building. In this particular case, they're proposing a 7-foot by 4-foot sign for the front of the building at 28 square feet and a 4-foot by 2-foot sign for the rear of the building. They've sketched out a design and noted primary colors. They are repurposing some older signs, and there is a photo there of what those older signs will look like. So just imagine that sketch on that sign with the colors, I guess. So it's compliant with the code otherwise, as noted.
I move to approve.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, not hearing any. I'll vote yes. Joel?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Stan?
Yes.
Tony?
Yes.
And Barbara?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Number 5, consider C3 commercial design review, 503 East Main Street, Sugar Bowl Ice Cream Company, install a walk-up window.
So a correction, change in the address was noted earlier. The owners reside at 503 East Main Street. The
Okay.
subject of the application is at 410 West Water Street.
Okay.
The Sugar Bowl is at 410 West Water Street. So. And all this is installing a window, walk-up window for customer service at the ice cream parlor on the front facade of the building. Roughly 67 inches by 57 inches. It's code compliant otherwise, just needs Commission review.
I move to approve.
Okay, motion to approve, second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion. Any other questions or comments?
Just how will this work with the sidewalk traffic?
That'd be a question. You know, just in reviewing the city's sidewalk code for downtown, business owners are allowed up to 5 feet for the display of their wares. If a person or persons standing at this window obtaining ice cream, is that within that allowable space? I mean, it's really not displaying wares or merchandise, but somebody's...
Can't be any worse than Whippy did.
Right. So,
But as far as the cleanliness of the sidewalk, I mean, Whippy typically spray it down, I think, twice a day, but, I mean, I don't, there
and
would be
it's
an issue
the responsibility of any business
Yeah.
owner to keep
Yeah.
their sidewalk clean and free of debris.
I'm good.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Joel?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Stan?
Yes.
Tony?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion passes. Number 6, consider setting a public hearing or zoning of property, Ossie Properties, is that number 4 Ohio Street?
So again, number 4 Ohio Street is the address of
Okay.
the applicant and the property owner.
There you
The
go,
property
okay.
in question is on Highland Drive, does not have an address. There's a map of the property location on the second page of the application, and there's a legal description and a plat behind that.
So it's up behind Venheim where they're putting the other buildings, so.
Right.
It's actually,
And my understanding is the Mossmans that purchased the land to the east of that are looking at squaring up that lot. I think there were some initial design questions during the preliminary plat review for that subdivision, and this
Yep.
would help address some of those issues.
Okay.
So this action I'm asking tonight is to set a date for a public hearing, August 13, 7:10 p.m.
That's our next meeting.
That's your next meeting?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Monday, August 13, 7:10 p.m.
Well, I'll make the motion to set the public
Okay,
hearing.
we got a motion, do we have a
I'll
second?
second that.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, not hearing any. Start with Joel.
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Stan?
Yes.
Tony?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
And I will vote yes.
Abstain?
I
Okay,
have to abstain.
Barbara
abstain.
abstains.
okay. Still passes.
Oh, yeah. Barbara, can you say why you're abstaining?
Oh, because it's part of the property that's being developed by Tom Osmond Constructions.
You have a conflict.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, number 7, discussion and possible action of sidewalk development plan. We have a presentation by McClure Engineering Company.
So I'd like to just open up and introduce Jeff Shug is here from McClure Engineering Company. The Planning and Zoning Commission engaged McClure Engineering, made a recommendation to the City Council to hire McClure Engineering for design services and concept drawings on this project. My understanding, the Planning and Zoning Commission wanted to look at the Bruning subdivision in its entirety as a project rather than look at or negotiate each individual property, each individual sidewalk area in a one-on-one capacity. This is the second time then that the commission has seen representatives from McClure. The first time they were here was more of a work session for the commission to look at, well, what about this? And could we change this? And so today we're here to look at some of those changes and recommendations from that meeting. I'll tell the commission, as I reminded some of the residents that were here earlier during the open house, this is an opportunity to provide some concept statements and some direction via your recommendation to the City Council. I would expect those to be a higher elevation review than looking at actual construction costs or materials or designs. That would be the purview of the City Council if they would decide to move forward with your recommendations. So tonight you're looking at the larger picture. So for example, we had two images over here as concepts. One, sidewalks everywhere, because that was one option when we started this thing, and I know the commission's kind of moved on from that position. Two, on the flip side, looking at sidewalks on one side of the street or the other, or as they're most economical. And so Jeff and his team is here to kind of talk through what that looks like and engage the commission in further discussion.
And I believe that we've refined these exhibits further since the last time that we were here. Chad, it sounds like you've kind of thrown out the dual-sided option, so maybe we could just blow up on the single-sided?
Well, ask these guys.
Okay. I guess that's a question for you all. Do you want me to walk you through the double-sided option a little bit? or would you like to just skip directly to the single-sided option?
Single's fine by me. What's the rest of the board feel like?
Single.
Yes, single.
Single and
Okay.
skip the
All
double.
right, Bashan, I want you to close the one and, yeah, blow that one up. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the single-sided option, we attempted, and again, this is all with the field review, which is our guys on the ground walking up and down the street taking a look at this. We don't have any survey information or hard points and elevations for things. But based on that field review, we did pick a side of the street for, so I'll let him zoom in on this quick. There you go. All right. So on Walnut Street, we looked at how to describe this. On the north and west side of Walnut Street seemed to be the most feasible location. So we do show a single sidewalk through there and some modifications to driveways in order to accommodate it. We don't anticipate a lot of retaining walls through that area, but there are some areas where that will be needed. On the Bruning Drive cul-de-sac, we show that again right on the north side of that cul-de-sac, seemed to be the most feasible for that location. On the Linden Street, again, the north side of that particular street appeared to be the most feasible, as well as the east side of Eileen Court. And the Park Street, we are looking at the west side of Park Street and then switching to the east side at the intersection with Walnut. On Linden Street, we are looking at the west side of Linden Street, and then again at Walnut, switching to the east side and then going north from there. And again, this is just mostly trying to maintain continuity between crosswalks in order to make sure that we have the ADA requirements fulfilled as part of the project. In order to accomplish this, we're anticipating the need for a fair amount of retaining walls in different areas and quite a bit of driveway replacement and reconfiguration in order to get the cross slopes on the sidewalk to match what the ADA requirements are. One option that we've talked about since giving these to the city is if you wanted to go this direction with it. The streets out there, most of them are 31-foot back-to-back. A lot of residential streets, depending on which jurisdiction you're in, go in at a 27-foot width. That would allow us, if you so desired, us to look at this, to actually reconfigure the curb on the street to bring it in 4 feet and make the street 4 feet narrower. So it'd be a 27-foot back-to-back street rather than a 31, and then do what's called kind of a California sidewalk, where you would build that sidewalk right up against that curb. Because the street in general is already at a slope and location where we wouldn't have to put in a lot of retaining walls or do a lot of excessive grading, that would probably be the most cost-effective option in order to put a sidewalk in.
So does that mean with the California sidewalk, there's no grass between the sidewalk and...
Correct. It's right up against the back of the curb. Yep. We did look at cost for the two options that we presented in the past. The single-sided option is about $400, probably, let's call it $425,000 construction. The dual-sided option, let's call it $750,000 in order to do the dual-sided. It's hard to determine what the cost savings would be with the California option, but that's something we'd be happy to take a look at, you know, if you guys make a recommendation to do the single-sided option.
Would that be significant on the California? Significant?
I don't know, because we would be replacing some curb, and so, you know, we'd have to take a look at that as part of the cost structure. But, you know, We can't do it with the dual-sided option, because otherwise you'd be narrowing that street by 8 feet. It just won't work. But on the single-sided option, that California sidewalk, and we wouldn't need to do it everywhere either. We could just do it in the locations where the grade is significantly challenged, or the driveway has a significant challenge, or there's a lot of landscaping, and place it in the areas where it is more feasible back at the standard location.
But doing a California sidewalk, did you say that's quite a bit of savings doing it that way?
We believe so. We haven't put a cost to that one yet, because it's just something that we've been discussing in the last week or two, after especially hearing some comments recently.
Because there would be no, well, I mean, at least in the new division, there would be no need for retaining walls.
I can't tell you for sure yet. Again, this is all based on us walking around out there in the street. I have no survey information. It's all based off of aerial photos. So, until we actually get into design, there's a lot of questions I just can't definitively answer. But we anticipate that the California option would be cheaper than a lot of retaining walls along the project. But we have to balance that against you would be putting in a new curb and gutter. So,
Is there any safety concerns? Is it too easy for a walker or a child or somebody to veer out into the street?
it's not as safe as putting the sidewalk at the standard location, because you're not going to have that parkway in between, that is typically, somewhere between 5 feet and 10 feet. But these are low-volume streets as well.
Right.
And so, that is somewhat of a safety factor in and of its own, is the low-volume streets. And when you narrow that street from 31 foot to 27 foot, and then park a few cars along it, that should tend to lower the speeds on the streets as well.
How about snow removal? When you start snow removal and you start building up snow, how is that handled in this particular circumstance with the California sidewalk?
Well, the function of removing snow would be the same. You go out and shovel it or take your snow blower and get it off of
I
there.
mean, I'm talking about the street department plowing, and it plows up. I know in my driveway, and I have a full boulevard, in my driveway, you have
that will be an issue.
Significant amount of snow.
Correct. That will be an issue. And that's something that you guys can handle by policy.
Basically, be like across the river, where going from the bridge up to the Casey's.
Okay.
And the city plows that off.
We have some other areas of town that have maybe even 2-foot sidewalk, but they have them in this style. We've seen it in different places too. It can be a problem, certainly.
Center Street is all, one side of the street, at the north end is California sidewalks.
Is street parking allowed up in that subdivision, Chad,
I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is.
I don't believe it was signed, no parking, and typically residential streets are not. I mean, from my perspective, safety-wise, I'd like to have as much parking on the street as possible, so.
That would be the biggest downfall. You're taking half a parking stall out.
No, you're narrowing the
That's
road.
half a parking stall.
And I don't know if your ordinances allow parking on both sides of a 31-foot street, or you would only allow parking on one side.
Depends on the area.
Okay.
I don't know that we differentiate by footage.
Most municipalities, it's one side or the other. Up to, once the street gets past 31 foot wide, they might go on both sides. But kind of your standard width per SUDAS is 27 foot, and then the next step up is to 31 foot, and then I think it goes to 45. And at 27 and 31, most of the metros that we work in, that would be parking on one side of the street.
My opinion regarding Eileen Court, I think that's kind of a waste right there.
Pardon me, I didn't
On that
quite-
cul-de-sac,
the sidewalk?
Sidewalk there on Eileen.
Again, we're just looking ahead at per code. And per code, from your subdivision ordinance, every street should have sidewalk on both sides. So, and we're here to take direction
Yeah, right.
from the city. So.
We had discussed at a previous meeting that
The preliminary.
the preliminary plot did not show sidewalks on either of the cul-de-sacs.
Correct. There's no
Yeah, I think so.
sidewalks on the cul-de-sac.
I know you'd had the conversation before, and I think your thought was to not put them in the cul-de-sacs.
Correct.
You should reaffirm that if you're going to make a recommendation tonight, or at least have some conversation about that.
And how do we want to proceed? We'd like to eliminate the cul-de-sac ones, is what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not convinced of that.
Guess I'm not either.
I live on a cul-de-sac, and people walk around cul-de-sacs all the time.
I mean, is there any way that we could make references to, depending upon, the length of the cul-de-sac and/or how many homes are on that particular, how many home sites are on a cul-de-sac? I mean, because I can kind of see that, I can kind of see that too. Go either way with it.
If you develop some standard like that, and that maybe is a good idea, I would suggest that you make that recommendation to change the code citywide, that we follow that standard wherever we put in cul-de-sacs, whatever that is. If it's a distance, if it's a number of homes, if it's something similar, make a recommendation to the council that the code be changed to adopt that standard.
But because we approved, we didn't, but that preliminary plot site was approved, that's this standard for this. That's
Right, that's
correct?
I would agree with that, that
I mean,
if the
that's
city
what was
approved
approved.
the plan, I mean,
Something was approved several years ago, that's
Right.
right. At least in the preliminary plan, right.
But going
And
forward.
I would only ask the question, would you actually want to change your code? Because
Right.
pretty much everywhere else, the code would be sidewalks on both sides of every street, everywhere. I mean,
But we
that's,
still seem to have this issue about cul-de-sacs. Even though we
Right.
have that code provision today, Jeff, we still have the discussion about cul-de-sacs generally.
and again, it's a policy decision for the city to make. And so I'm just only letting you know what almost every, and I would say nearly 95% of every other city in Iowa, it's sidewalks on both sides everywhere.
Yes.
So with a single side, the entire subdivision would be a special project?
That's the way we've been discussing it, is that you'd propose it to the city council as a city project, and so everybody shares in costs. All the homeowners, maybe not equally, but right now the sidewalk policy that you adopted about a year ago says one side shares more than the other side, depending on where the sidewalk is. And then, of course, the city has shared costs in there too for crosswalks and other things. But that's the way you'd been talking, is presented as a full project for the full subdivision to the city council, set it up as a bid public improvement project, and then costs are assessed based on that sidewalk policy.
I think that's a good idea.
just as long as we're still looking at preliminary designs, does the city bear any responsibility for improving sidewalks not meeting 100% ADA compliance? I mean, is there,
No, the
do
code's
you
pretty...
get partial credit for, there's not a sidewalk there now, we put a sidewalk in? If you're going to make that action, do you have to go the whole way? And I'm saying that maybe in relationship to some of
Are
this-
you asking
this-
whether you have to strictly follow ADA?
Yeah, is the answer.
Okay, the federal government will tell you absolutely yes, without question, with severe consequences.
All right.
But we also know that in some places, we have to put in steps on a street corner
Right.
versus handicap accessible letdowns.
And that's all accomplished through a, you can submit a, I can't remember, it's kind of like a hardship for a particular area if there's no physical way to meet it. But as the engineer signing off on the project, I have to put together a memo that describes exactly why we can't comply strictly with ADA and sign my name to it.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
We do it a lot. I mean,
does.
it happens a lot, so I'm not saying it's a rare thing, but
Yeah.
So how do we want to proceed?
Well, I think it's going to be important to know the cost difference in the California sidewalk versus the current. I mean, I know we said we weren't going to talk about that, but
Well, so I
there's
think
a
that-
significant difference than,
Well, so, you can get into that a little bit, and as part of your recommendation is, hey, we want sidewalks, and we want sidewalks on one side. We know that might be, $400,000 to $500,000. Council, as part of our recommendation, you should look into California sidewalks, because with that, we know that will reduce costs. You don't necessarily need to know how much if you're open to the concept.
Right, because it's the city council.
And then the council will, right, because you're making a recommendation anyway. They have ultimate final authority to, they could come back and say, no, we're doing sidewalks on both sides everywhere. Heck with it. They could do that, right? So, but you're charged, you're the professionals for planning, come up with a recommendation that makes some sense. So why don't you just start with, I'd made a check mark here, just going back to the cul-de-sacs. Why don't you just, just kind of pick off the pieces and have a discussion just on cul-de-sacs and kind of decide where you want to end up on those, and then we'll go to the next piece.
You want to go a certain length in so many houses, or? I guess I don't know, that wouldn't work in your neighborhood.
No,
Just
mine's
one house.
Yeah, but mine's there, so.
I think that it would be difficult for the city to force sidewalks on the cul-de-sacs in this subdivision because the preliminary plat was approved by the city
Agreed.
without sidewalks in the cul-de-sacs. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, when we talk about this project, I'm in agreement with that.
So I guess, is that a motion?
It can be. If
That's what I'm saying, go ahead, that's fine.
Well, I move that we make the recommendation to City Council that for the Bruning subdivision, that sidewalks are not required in either of the two cul-de-sacs.
And you're seconding?
I'll think of that.
Okay.
And then is this where we would also make reference to them looking into future
Changing the
cul-de-sacs?
code for
No,
sidewalks.
deal with the Bruning subdivision
Okay.
first,
Okay.
and then come out of that.
This pertains to this.
Okay. Okay.
And then if we want to make a recommendation on over a city overall
Yeah.
cul-de-sac, then we can do that. But let's get done with this first. So,
So we have a first
I
and a
mean,
second.
Bruning Drive has 4 houses on it.
yeah.
I mean,
Well, 6, but no. You're saying that's a reason that you should have sidewalks?
yeah, you're going to have a lot of foot traffic. I said Bruning Drive has, what, 5 houses sitting on it?
Yeah, they're all built on. Yeah.
On one side.
Yeah, on one side. I'm saying a sidewalk on one side.
4 new ones since I left.
Okay, so
There's a house here,
Okay.
here now.
Bruning Drive needs a sidewalk.
5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8
8
or
houses.
9 in Bruning.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. That makes my point even greater.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
When I look at it, Brian, I think about Stan's situation, one house and that's it. And then you have this where you have 8 or 9, and I'm sure there's a lot there that hasn't been developed yet. Then you look at Eileen Court, so it's
I could see Eileen Court without it. I mean,
I could see
I'm not
Eileen
picking on
Court.
myself, but
No,
I just,
and
it's
I can see Eileen Court without, but,
Bruning Drive with that number.
right.
Well, no, and I agree. And I don't think that the city ordinance should be changed. I think that new subdivisions should have sidewalks on both sides of the street as they are built. But I guess I'm having a hard time with us overriding a previous agreement. I know that it's happened a long time ago, and that the sidewalks have not ever got built to this day, but I still am looking at whatever our predecessors signed off on in, was it 92? And said that the preliminary plan that showed sidewalks on one side of the street with none in the cul-de-sac was approved. And so we can say to the homeowners or to the developer that there needs to be sidewalks on one side of the street because that's what the preliminary plan showed and that was the agreement. But I don't think it makes a lot of sense for the city to retroactively force it on what was beyond in that preliminary plat.
But then you're saying you need sidewalks on both sides of everything else.
As it is built.
Because that was in the preliminary
No, but
plat,
for Broning addition.
for the Bruning addition.
Are you're not saying that, though, are
There
you?
weren't sidewalks on both sides. of the
Yeah,
plat.
preliminary plat there was.
Preliminary plat show both sides.
No.
No.
No, the preliminary plat only showed them on one side.
On one side?
Some
Okay.
say no sidewalks.
The final plat shows them
Final
no
plat,
sidewalks.
preliminary plats showed it.
Which is what we approved, the preliminary plat.
Planning and zoning did, you're
Yes,
correct.
planning and zoning approved the preliminary site plan for that subdivision with sidewalks on one side. That's what we approved way back. We didn't, but the planning and zoning commission approved
Yeah, I
that.
think that's right.
And not in the cul-de-sac.
Was there none in the cul-de-sacs before?
Yeah, I don't think they're on the preliminary plat either. I'm sorry I didn't bring that, but I don't.
They are not.
I think Lou's right.
Okay, so what motion are we voting on then?
So you have a motion from Zook and a second by Jenkins for no sidewalks in the Bruning subdivision on the cul-de-sacs.
So that includes Bruning Drive and Ellen Court.
Eileen Court, yep.
Okay?
And-
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Barbara?
Yes.
I'm going to vote nay. Joel?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Stan?
No.
Tony?
No.
So then what do we do?
Start over.
Yeah, so that basically didn't pass, correct?
Right. Why don't you tackle the California option?
Make a recommendation.
You wanna-
on that.
you wanna look at
Make
that
a
option or not?
recommendation to
Yep.
see if that's feasible cost-wise?
Well, before you get there, I'd go one step further. I'd say Eileen Court, no sidewalk with Bruning Drive has. I'd make a motion to that point.
I would second that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Hold on.
City council's the one that's got authority. We can just make recommendations.
Stan, clarify, your motion is for...
I'm moving that we require sidewalks on the one side of Bruning
Okay,
Drive
yep.
and Eileen Court be exempted out of there. No sidewalk required.
And Tony, you
I
seconded that,
second that.
okay.
Any other questions? Okay.
Yeah. Stan, would you be willing to amend that motion just to say that you're exempting Eileen Court? Because I don't want to come down on the same lines, voting against requiring Bruning Drive to put a sidewalk in.
Guess that's up to you. He's asking, are you asking him to amend it?
I am asking, yeah.
You can make a motion to amend.
Well, we're in
How's
discussion
that
at this
different?
point.
I mean, because he's saying put them on Bruning, but not on Eileen. How's that different from your saying just exempt Eileen, right?
Yeah.
That is right.
That is technically
Right, 'cause it was
exempting Eileen.
approved, So he's saying to exempt it now.
I can make the motion that no sidewalk on Eileen, period.
That's good.
Tony, are you okay with that?
I'm okay with the original motion staying there. Yeah.
Yes for both?
Well, no, the original.
No.
The original.
No. So vote on that motion. If it fails, then you go back, you know.
Then we can make it.
I will caution, we don't want to be here all night with
hear you.
motions back and forth, right?
Okay, then we'll vote on it.
I did get a hotel tonight, so.
Yeah.
Okay, Tony?
Yes.
Stan?
Yes.
Lou?
No.
Joel?
No, I'm sorry.
You're what?
I'm sorry. I'm voting no because I didn't want to.
That's fine, that's
Okay.
Brian?
Barbara. Barbara.
No, it's my turn, but I'm thinking. I'm gonna vote yes. Okay, Barbara?
No.
Okay. Again, that one failed, so, okay.
Can we just do a quick motion to exempt Eileen Court?
That's fine, yeah, make a
All
motion,
right.
that's fine.
Made.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, motion to exempt Eileen Court, correct? Is that what the motion is?
Yes.
Okay, and we have a second. Any other questions or comments? Okay, not hearing any, we'll get started again. Barbara?
Aye.
I'll go aye. Joel?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Stan?
Yes.
And Tony?
Yes.
Okay, that one passed. So now do we make a motion for the California option?
And maybe make that where feasible,
Or feasible, yeah. on that.
where feasible.
The
So,
single side and the
Single side.
recommendation for the city council to look at the California.
yeah.
Okay, if we go that route, that's fine.
Just one question about California. That one would be, I would presume, would be the least impeding upon existing utilities that are in place and others.
Again, we don't have survey, so, but
Survey, and they won't know that.
the intent is that we believe, because it's, we would be using a portion of the street, that it's going to be clear of, steep grades, because the street's already flat, be clear of trees or power poles or any of those items, because those are going to be behind the curb, but we might run into an intake here or there. So, it's an option, and I would say we wouldn't use it everywhere. We would use it where it's going to save money versus retaining walls or extensive landscaping being replaced or extensive driveway remove and replace.
I'm kind of guessing, it looks like to me like where you swung it in here in a few places is roughly where it would.
Yeah.
So the majority of Park Street would have it that way. And a lot of Walnut, so
I know it's out of order, but can I please ask one question?
That'll be up to the chair.
that's up to me, and right now it's not a public hearing. So there will be one, but not right tonight. Okay, what else? Any other questions? Is there a motion been put forward?
I think it makes sense to look into that option, though, for sure.
I wouldn't argue that one bit. Okay.
Well, in that case, I'll make a motion that we recommend to council that the option of the California sidewalk is looked at as in looking at part of these options.
For single side.
For the single side.
Yes.
I would second that.
Okay. Do you have any other questions or comments? Okay, not hearing any. I will vote nay. Joel?
Yes.
Lou?
Yes.
Stan?
I'm going to vote yes.
Tony?
Yes.
And Barbara?
Yes.
Okay. Passes. So now it's on the city council's shoulders.
Well, so kind of craft your final recommendation. You haven't really stated that in a motion in terms of sidewalks on one side. I mean, you have a little bit in the California where it kind of makes sense, but what about everywhere else? So just kind of frame, sidewalks on one side, sidewalks on both sides. I think you're saying sidewalks on one side, but you should say sidewalks on one
Yes.
side, right?
That's what she said, that's the motion she made, one side.
Yeah.
In an area,
Well, I took it to be more specific about California sidewalks.
But they said that was option number one, option for on one side of the street,
Okay, with California sidewalks being the
an option.
option. Okay.
An option to
So,
look
okay.
at.
I'll just make sure that that's more clear then.
Does that make more sense?
Yep,
and that's just in the Bruning edition.
yes.
I do have one question on, just a point of clarification. The numbers that you threw out before, the roughly 400 and 750,000, is that the cost for just this brewing addition proper, or actually everything that you've got shown in this plat down to the park?
I believe it's everything we have shown.
Okay.
I assume that's pretty much just the sidewalk cost.
The 450, because it was the single-sided option, would include the sidewalk. Sorry, I've been folding it up and putting notes on it. It's the single-sided option.
How many feet is that?
I got it in square yards, I apologize. You got a calculator? Get the right item. 2860. 9 square feet in a yard. I'm an engineer, I should know. About 6,400 lineal feet.
Okay, a 5-foot sidewalk.
4 foot.
So how many square feet is that? Go back to that one. This is how many?
6,860 square yards. Which is 25,740 square feet.
So again, Jeff, break down your costs there, the 450,000, what is in that? I know it's more than just
Oh, it's,
6,400.
yeah, it's traffic control, remove and reinstall signs, uncharted utility crossings, clearing and grubbing, topsoiling, excavation, class 10, embankment in place, curb and gutter here and there where it needs to be replaced. There wasn't a lot of that. PCC pavement samples and testing, removal of sidewalk, removal of driveway, removal of curb, sidewalk PCC 4-inch, sidewalk PCC 6-inch, detectable warnings, driveway pad, PCC 6-inch, sidewalk assurance testing, driveway assurance testing, hydraulic seeding and fertilizing, SWIP preparation and management, filter socks, erosion control, inlet protection, and then combined concrete sidewalk and retaining wall, which is one of those cross sections that we show on there where we anticipated we might need retaining walls in areas. And then concrete steps to replace some steps in a few areas where they might be needed. And then mobilization, painted pavement markings, and concrete washout.
Thank you.
Jeff, any other comments or closing?
The mayor.
Procedural question. For the public hearing that they will be having, will that be when it goes to the city council level, or will the corrections here and the expenses come back to the planning and zoning, and then you'll look at it again, and then go to the city council?
So I see procedurally that I think these guys are done forming their recommendation. And now staff will present that recommendation to the city council. The city council will take it under advisement. Maybe they send it to the street committee for further review. Maybe they want to spend more time with Jeff, getting down to brass tacks. Regardless, at some point in the process, there's going to be a required public hearing, but the city council may choose to hold another public hearing of their own as well. But unless these guys here and this commission want to spend more time with it, I think they're done. Here, right?
I just wanted to be clear, because I knew that there was
Yep.
public forum.
Yeah. Yep. And I would say, so I did put on the commission's desk here tonight 2 letters that were received within the last month or so. And so you have those. If anybody here tonight wishes to comment on this, if Brian's not going to entertain comments tonight, and that's his right, this is a public meeting, a meeting in the public, it's not a public hearing. Please send me comments, send me letters. You can certainly send them to the commission members or the council members as well. But sometimes I serve as the repository and then I disperse them out. So whatever's easier for you, I'm happy to take comments or visits or phone calls or whatever. So with that, Brian, I'll turn it back over to you for any last questions or comments of Jeff or me before we move on. That's all right.
As I personally will address a couple of the questions from this letter, if the board doesn't mind. I guess one of the questions was, does the planning zone have a concrete plan in place requiring sidewalks? And the other 38% of the city residents which do not have sidewalks. Yes, we do. The city plan is going to have a rotating plan. The whole city will be covered at one time or another. Okay? And why did they start this major project, begin with the Bruning subdivision? They were just in that circle of the area. It's the luck of the draw, I guess, is what I'm going to say on that one, because they were in the circle, correct, Chad?
Well, actually, they're not in the circle, but when we started this over a year, Brian, I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's what I'm saying. I want to just get this clarified.
We developed a plan that has 6 concentric circles.
Correct.
Starting in downtown center, because both the Planning and Zoning Commission at that time, and I don't know that you were all there, and the City Council believed that that had the highest and best available use or opportunity for use of sidewalks. And so let's start in the center of that bullseye and move out.
Yep.
In addition to that, they wanted to look at key areas that have been problematic for the city over many, many years, starting with Brunings with Phase 1. Now this year in 2018, we're starting with Phase 2. You or the council may choose another area to start looking at outside that circle that's been problematic over time. So that's how we got there with the Brunings subdivision. And just for the record, that letter that Brian's referencing that I referenced earlier is from Jim Marjorie Iverson, 1108 Linden Street. Any other comments? Barbara, did you have a question? I think your hand was up earlier. Did you?
Nothing? Okay. Not hearing any. Number 8, presentation by the Iowa Flood Center regarding conditions Upper Iowa River and Decorah.
Brian, so maybe we just give our presenters a moment to readjust. If you guys want to stay for Flood Center presentation, you're welcome to. If you got rooms, you might want to hang out. If there's anybody here that wants to take your leave, this would be the time to do that. And then with that, Larry Weber is here from the Iowa Flood Center. In a second, I'll let him introduce. We'll give everybody a second to kind of readjust here. So we're done with sidewalks. Good. We're done with sidewalks. Or at least this neighborhood. In theory, but we've not studied those plats, so we don't know what they show. But yes, maybe. But they may want to do that, too. Right? But the issue here is that the plat has sidewalks on one side, and no sidewalks in the cul-de-sacs. And on the final plat, it didn't have any sidewalks. And that's been the rub for 20 years. It is in the covenants, and they've all been told, or it is in the covenants. It's in the covenants that when you pull a building permit, you're required to put in sidewalks. Everywhere. It's a mess. There was language in free. Thank you. There was conversation in the earlier draft of the development agreement that subdivision sidewalks would only be required.
Yeah, I mean, there's one person that lives on this street.
That didn't make
And this is actually, I didn't realize that there was a letter on the back of the chat here. This person on here owns this lot, right, and is not planning on building it.
It doesn't talk about it.
And that's,
You ready?
they want to have a nice buffer there.
Okay. Let's proceed.
So Brian, before we get started here, I'd just like to make a statement here. In the review and consideration of the Menards application for rezoning and site plan development, the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission and the decision of the City Council must be supported by facts and evidence, not presumptions. The Commission will make an official record of its evaluation of the rezoning petition, including a review of the various factors it considers in making its final decision, your final decision. The Commission's review will include a findings of fact. The Commission's recommendation to the Council on the rezoning application should apply the comprehensive plan, the City Code, Iowa Administrative Code 414.3 to its findings of fact to support your recommendation. Tonight's presentation by the Iowa Flood Center is part of the Commission's due diligence in reviewing Menard's rezoning application. As part of its formal report to the Council, the Commission's analysis must include applying the Iowa Flood Center's modeling regarding Menard's site plan, the Walmart store, the city's 100-year and 500-year floodplains and compared to the comprehensive plan, the City Code, and the Iowa Administrative Code, Chapter 414. Tonight's part of that process. I introduce Larry Weber from the Iowa Flood Center for his presentation.
Thanks, Chad. As Chad said, my name is Larry Weber. I'm the Executive Associate Dean for the College of Engineering at the University of Iowa. For 13 and a half years, I served as the Director of the Hydraulics and Water Resources program at the university called IIHR Hydroscience and Engineering. I was the Principal Investigator of the recently HUD-funded program that we call the Iowa Watershed Approach, which does include the Upper Iowa River as part of its program. I was contacted by Chad and others here on city administration to take a look at the Upper Iowa River in the context of flooding, the Menard sighting, and historical rainfall in the Midwest. So the purpose of my presentation tonight is to provide some backdrop to what's happening in the Upper Iowa with respect to rainfall and stream flow. As a context, the IHR program is a program of about 50 PhD level scientists that work in hydraulics, water resources, and fluid mechanics, along with 100 staff and 100 students, so about 250 people focused on work of this nature. One of our staff has been looking at trends in flooding and heavy rainfall events across the Midwest, in fact across the United States, and this is a plot that looks back at one USGS stream gauge. It defines a threshold flood. If you see on the left-hand panel a black line horizontally across that plot. And what we do, or he does in that particular case, is he counts every time we get a flood greater than some threshold, and he looks at the number of times we get those floods in each and every year. Okay? This is one scientific study that's been published to look at the frequency and the magnitude of flooding. And so the question that we get oftentimes, is it flooding more often, and is it flooding at a greater magnitude? And when he's looked at that, and you see at this particular gauge, this is not the Upper Iowa, but for this particular gauge, there is an increase in the frequency of flooding at that gauge. When we do that analysis across Iowa, in fact across the Midwest, you see every one of these blue triangles that's pointing upward shows an increase in the frequency of flooding over, say, the past 50 years or more. The gray symbols are ones, stream gauges where there's no significant either upward or downward trend, and the red symbols pointing downward show a decrease in the frequency of flooding. So what you see there is across, South Dakota, all across Iowa, eastern Nebraska, most of Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, we see an increase in flooding at those USGS gauges that have a long enough period of record. In western Kansas and the Upper Peninsula, in northern Michigan and northern Wisconsin, in some cases you see a decrease in flooding. But all across that region, which is Iowa, and for most of northeast Iowa, we see an increase in the frequency of flooding. If we look at rainfall, we also go back. Now, we don't have as much detailed record of rainfall in history, but when we do that, we also notice that we see an increase in heavy rainfall in Iowa. And again, anecdotally, most of you have seen that with many of these 6, 8, 10, and 12-inch rainfall events that we've experienced over the past few years. Now, you might have noted in the plot that we're showing here of the state of Iowa, the Upper Iowa is not shown. The stream gauge in the Upper Iowa at Decorah or Dorchester are not shown. And the reason they're not shown is we don't have a continuous record. And so that makes it a little bit more difficult to do this kind of analysis in Decorah and Dorchester because we don't have these long periods of record that go back 60, 70, and 80 years. And so what we're showing here in the upper left-hand corner is the watershed boundary. We have the Upper Iowa River at Decorah, Stream Gauge, and Dorchester. In the upper right-hand panel, you'll see the rainfall over the past almost 70 years. And there's a trend line, that's a little bit light on the screen, but that trend line is showing an increase in annual precipitation. That's not only seen in the upper Iowa and northeast Iowa, but that's seen across most of the state of Iowa. In the lower left-hand corner, we'll see that from 1950 until 2020, we look at Decorah and Dorchester the same, and we have to do some scaling there. But the take-home message there is that rainfall that's converted to stream flow is increasing. Okay, so we're seeing an increase in stream flow, in the volume of stream flow over that 70-year period. In fact, we see, about the rainfall increasing from around 30 inches of rainfall to about 36 inches of rainfall over that 70-year period, and we see the stream flow increasing from about 6 or 7 inches of rainfall to about 15 inches of rainfall. So increases in stream flow, and we also look at the percentage of that stream flow or rainfall converted to stream flow, and so a greater portion of the rain is being converted to stream flow. That's probably because of land use changes, changes in agricultural practices, changes in development. So we see an increase in rainfall, an increase in the percentage of that rainfall converted to stream flow, and hence an increase in stream flow. Okay? We look at the magnitude of the peak floods, and so this is going back each and every year back to the 1920s. Again, we had to fill in some gaps. We moved some gauge from Dorchester and Freeport back up to Decorah, and so we had to do some analysis here. But effectively, this is to estimate the observed peak stream flow in Decorah going back to the 19-teens. So each year we're looking at the peak event, and there's a slight increase in the peak, and you'll notice the events that have happened over that peak. 2008 here is shown as the flood of record in Decorah. When we look at that data, I think this is an important consideration for discussions about development in the floodplain. We calculate a 100-year recurrence level, or a 100-year stream flow. You've heard about the 100-year flood. If we went back and we did that calculation in 1930 with a very short window of data, we would have calculated something around 12,000 cubic feet per second. As the period of record gets longer and we have these larger events, we continue to make that calculation. We show it here every 10 years, so 1940, 1950, and all the way out to 2010 and in fact 2017, and that 100-year stream flow is increasing. So the 100-year flood, okay, we're seeing these major floods continues to increase, and the current estimate of the 100-year flood is 26,350 cubic feet per second at Decorah. Okay, and so that's increased from about 22,000 cubic feet per second around the year 2000. Okay, so that's increasing. There's a high likelihood that that will continue to increase over the next several decades. Likewise, we can do the same analysis for the 500-year flow, and you see if we calculated that 500-year flood back in 1930, that flood would have been just under 15,000 cubic feet per second. And then we had a major event in about 1940, and so there was an increase. And the current estimate of the 500-year flood is 35,800 cubic feet per second for the Decorah area. Okay, so I think that's important to note. The historic crest at Decorah and Dorchester, in 2008, the historic crest occurred here in Decorah. Gauge reading was 17.9 feet. The discharge was 34,100, and so you can think about that being just under the 500-year flood as it's estimated today. Okay. Likewise, down in Dorchester, its flood of record was just last August in 2016. We had heavy rainfall, as you can see in the 2016 total rainfall accumulation map. We had a lot of rainfall in this Decorah area and just downstream from Decorah, and we actually had a greater peak in Dorchester in 2016, the fourth highest flood in Decorah by stage in 2016. So two of the top four highest stage readings in Decorah were in the last 8 years. So those are two major events. We can look at just the evolution. of that rainfall. And we put this out, this is in August of 2016, and you see the accumulation of rainfall. We're showing both the Turkey River watershed and the Upper Iowa watershed, both impacted in August of 2016. You see the rainfall map there and the response to the stream gauges, where we had quite a response in El Dorado in the Turkey River, quite a steep response in Dorchester, a slightly smaller response on the Decorah gauge. But it just shows the sensitivity of those rainfall patterns. I mean, if this rainfall would have shifted, the centroid of it would have shifted north by 20 miles or west by 20 miles, or in fact east by 20 miles, it could have been less. But these intense rains that we're getting, we're seeing greater than 8 inches in the centroid of that rainfall event, I think are elements that we need to think about a little bit when we're doing some planning for flood mitigation. So the site that we looked at, this is an aerial image taken during August of 2016, estimated here at about 20,000 cubic feet per second river flow. You see the Walmart site development, the Menard site development, Freeport downstream. The river floodplain on river left, looking downstream, is well inundated in the floodplain. River right is inundated as well. There are some crops in the Menard site. You can see some water in it. It doesn't show that it's fully submerged, but there's likely water throughout that entire area. This is just upstream from the Freeport Bridge. As that water is flowing back to the bridge opening, you see it coming across the floodplain. So there's some slow movement of water there. It's not a very strong, high current, active part of the floodway, but there's certainly water coming across back to the river channel, converging to get under the highway roadway bridge there. We were able to do this work. We've only been in contact with the city over the last couple weeks, but in this particular location of the Upper Iowa River, the USGS had completed a study or worked on a study in 2010. That was to develop updated floodplain maps for the Upper Iowa in this region. We've used that model. We've updated it with the latest available information, so we've made it the most relevant. And what you see here is the delineation. The blue shaded area shows the extent of the 100-year flood plain. The hatched area shows the area of the floodway. And the difference between those two is the floodway, which we'll talk about here. The floodway is this narrower region, and the floodway is determined by taking the floodplain and the extents and filling it up with fill material until the river rises 1 foot. Okay, once it's risen 1 foot, that defines the boundary of the floodway. Anything inside of the floodway is going to cause an increased rise in the river greater than 1 foot. And so this is standard national flood insurance rate map, flood language, if you will, and that's what the USGS did in this particular study. So I go back here and say, oops. When we look at that hatched area, certainly that is the area which is going to cause increases in flooding elevation or water elevation in the upstream and local area. Outside of that area is a less active part, let's call it the floodway or the flood fringe, where there's water stored there, but it's not part of the active flowing riverway. So we've taken the LIDAR data. This is the aerial data that we have across the entire state. It's very detailed topography data. You see the river channel here. You see, looking on the inside bend, the flood plain. You see the right side flood plain as well. The model that we run, this hydraulic model, it's a mathematical model. It's a representation of what happens in the river. It has cross sections. Each one of these lines shows a cross section across that model. And we take that model and we calibrate it. So we want to run the model, we put river flow into the model, and then we compare it with high water marks as recorded by the USGS and other folks. And we have a very good calibration. So we know that the model is accurate, and this was a relevant data from 2008. So it's a high flow, 33,800 cubic feet per second. We have a good model. We've done a couple of things. We've run the existing condition that includes the Walmart development in the flood plain. We've added the Menards development as we understand it, and so that would be a borrow pit that's excavated. About 5.1 million cubic feet are taken out of that borrow pit area. Part of that borrow pit then is going to be filled with water. That 5.1 million cubic feet taken out of that area, our understanding is 4.1 million cubic feet will be put onto the Menard site to raise the elevation for the building development site, and a portion of that borrow pit would be available to store water. So if we look at the available storage and the amount that's placed in the floodplain, we end up taking 1.7 million cubic feet of storage out of the floodplain. So we've taken 1.7 million cubic feet of water storage out of the floodplain. When we compare that to the 2008 flood, this 33,000 cubic feet per second, it would take the river just under a minute, or just about a minute, to fill up that volume, 1.7 million cubic feet. So this is, in the context of flooding, is the volume that we've taken out of the floodplain is not going to hold the river for hours and hours, even minutes and minutes, but about a minute to fill that area. So from the context of the Upper Iowa watershed, it's a relatively small volume. We also look at removing the Walmart site just to get some context for what this development is doing in this general area. We know that Walmart, it's unlikely that you would take that out of the flood plain, but it is a development that is probably a development of memory for people up in the region. So we look at that as well. And when we run the model, this is for the 2008 simulation, we run 34,100 cubic feet per second through it. And we're going to use existing conditions, that's with Walmart there. When we add the Menards project into the floodplain, we see an increase in the water level in that region of 0.13 feet. So that's about 1.5 inches, or 1 inch and 9/16. So it's not a big increase. The reason that it's not a big increase is that this project is sitting out on the fringe of the floodplain. It takes a little bit of volume of storage away, but there isn't high velocities through there. There's not a lot of energy loss in that area, and so it's a relatively small increase. Just to give some context to that, we also took the Walmart project, and we took the Walmart project out, and we see about a 0.1 foot drop from the Walmart project coming out. So again, that gives us, a little bit of confidence that taking Walmart out or adding Menards in, we're seeing about a 0.13 foot increase, or about 1/10 of a foot decrease by taking the Walmart project out. So we do that for the 2008. We can look at just the differences off of the existing, and again, these are the same numbers that I just talked about already. We can look at the 100-year flood. That's a 26,350 CFS flow. Again, there we're going to bring, that's a lower flow than the 2008 flood, so the increase is going to be about 1/10 of a foot. And we can look at the differences along that distance. We're going from the Freeport Bridge, and this plot goes back upstream to just rivers downstream of the fairgrounds. Okay, so as you get to the fairgrounds, the 1/10 of a foot is almost not measurable anymore. It's down to a couple hundredths of a foot. Likewise, we look at the 500-year flow. That's 35,800. And so, again, you see these kind of similar differences, about 0.13 feet. It's not surprising that discharge is about the same as the 2008 flood. I think one of the take-home messages that we have when we go out and work with communities on floodplain development and the impact of these projects is really thinking about what do you as a commission and what does the Decorah City Council and the community of Decorah really want to do with developing in the floodplain. Oftentimes an individual project may not have a tremendous impact at that particular time, but as you saw these increases in the Q100 and Q500, that increased over the last 50 years, we expect those to increase over the next 50 years. And so as those discharges continue to increase, the likelihood and the impact of an individual project becomes more. Likewise, the collective development across the entire floodplain also has a greater impact. This was the 500-year off of the existing. I won't go back to, again, that's 0.13 feet. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
What was the second graph there? The first one showed the elevation, the change in elevation, and this one is showing...
Just off of the, because it's difficult to see what the differences are when we look at total feet, so this is elevation off of mean sea level. What we're doing now is we're going to subtract, adding the Menards project, subtract that from the existing, and so here's where you see the water differences from the Freeport Bridge back to about the county fairgrounds. So this shows this about 0.13 foot impact that Menard, raise of water level that Menards has. The green line shows the decrease in the water surface elevation if we took the Walmart project out.
Thank you, Larry. Commission, questions, comments?
Will we have access to your PowerPoint?
Yes, I've left it with Chad.
Okay. Any other questions?
Brian, you have representatives from Menards here. Tyler Edwards is here. I would suggest maybe you give him an opportunity to comment or question Larry as well as part of the due process.
I guess we'll open it up to you for right now.
Sure. I did have one question. So in my research between College Ave Bridge and Decorah and the Freeport Bridge, it's about 57 square miles more watershed draining into the river. How does that development outside of what we're doing impact, that section of river?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but within that additional 57 miles of drainage, I don't know, I haven't done the calculation or had my staff do a calculation to see what percentage of that floodplain is developed. I'm sure it's significant because of the city of Decorah lying in that area. If you're asking if we took that entire development out, what?
No, say change. So say something gets developed within that 57 square miles. How does that impact the river flow, essentially in front of where we want to build?
Yeah, so we haven't done a calculation on that, so it'd be hard for me to kind of speculate on that particular question.
He's just basically saying the watershed from one bridge to the other is 57 square miles.
Additional, yes.
So he's saying and right now it's primarily undeveloped. So he's saying what will that, if it becomes developed, how will that impact this site downstream from it?
Yeah, and so again, if I understand the question and not knowing exactly what the width of the floodplain is there and looking at that area, the point that I'm trying to make tonight is that any one of these projects, I think, as we look at the impact on river level is relatively small. Further development upstream, further development downstream. The question becomes when, if we forecasted, if we look back 50 years and we forecast ahead 50 years, I know that, we work with a lot of communities that are questioning decisions that were made 50 years ago to develop in the floodplain, and their concern might be, what are we going to be looking at 50 years from now as this Q100 continues to increase, the Q500 continues to increase. Some communities are taking a more cautionary approach and saying, they're going to, limit development within the 500-year floodplain. They're going to hold, standards to a higher level in the Q1 in the 100-year floodplain. Again, those are community decisions. That's not our decision. All we're trying to do is provide context for the changing of Q100, the changing of stream flow, the change of precipitation, and how that might impact various decisions that are being made.
The St. Paul office of the Army Corps, that's kind of in charge of the Decorah levee, seemed to indicate to me that because the finished floor elevation of Walmart is higher than ours, they're what they call the control of flooding, based on water flowing through there.
Again, there's very little shadow effect because there's very low velocity in that area. If both of the projects, in particular if Walmart was moved, closer to the floodway, where we had more of an active flowway across there could be a shadowing effect. Absolutely. That's why we did, do the analysis of taking both projects out, and we see a similar impact to both projects. Nothing real surprising there. I think a lot of times, there's a perception, perhaps in the public, that these projects, end up resulting in, several feet of rise. We don't see that at all. We're talking about tenths of a foot. We're talking about 1.5 inches. But again, I think the question, that some communities are facing is how much of the development, how intensely, do we want to develop these areas, recognizing that, we are seeing changes in precipitation and stream flow.
How does that tenth of a foot or a couple of inch or whatever it was dissipate as it goes downstream.
Yeah, and so I can go back to that. If we look, we don't have to get very far downstream. So downstream in this particular project is to, the left on the graph with the Freeport Bridge all the way to the far left. So we're seeing very little change in the water level downstream from the project. This is a relatively slow-moving, relatively flat river segment, and so we would expect, more obstruction providing a greater impact upstream than we would downstream. Yeah.
Okay, so for the benefit of everyone from Freeport that's concerned about their homes, you're saying that any tenth of a foot rise that our development will cause would dissipate long before it gets within
A couple hundred feet.
down the river?
I would say, even from this project, what we're looking at is, something about, 4,000 to 5,000 feet downstream. Certainly within a couple hundred feet of the project site, we don't see, any measurable difference.
Okay, so with our development, the people that are built along the river there would not have any more water in their basements or anything?
Again, and this, I would call this, somewhat of a preliminary study. I mean, I feel good about the study. I know the model's calibrated. We were engaged in this project a couple weeks ago, did this simulation. It's a single, what we call a one-dimensional model. You're probably familiar with that. If we really want to look at what the impact on the floodplain is, we might go to a more sophisticated two-dimensional model. Again, with 1.7 million cubic feet of volume taken out of the floodplain. That seems like a big number, but it's a small volume relative to the amount of water coming down the river. So the impact downstream, I think, is very small. In this particular case, we're showing it, I would say, not measurable.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about upstream? So you said there is an upstream impact.
I want to add, are you talking the bridge downtown or the bridge out on the highway?
You mean upstream?
Yeah.
My question?
Yeah.
Well, my question was going to be, so downstream.
No, I understand that, but what bridges are you talking about? I know we got the one in Freeport.
We mentioned College Drive before.
College Drive, okay.
To Freeport, that's my
Okay, that's your
study area.
That's what I was
Whatever you
asking.
want to call it. So going upstream, how far upstream would the impact be?
So what we did on the plots that I just showed you, 18,000 feet upstream is, just south of Winnebago County Fairgrounds. That's as far as we've extended those plots out. And at that point, we're a couple hundredths of a foot. So I would say probably, again, this is an estimate, I would say that by the time we got further upstream from the Winnebago County Fairgrounds, we'd be getting to a point where it's not measurable.
I'm not actually familiar where the fairgrounds are.
It'd be in between that, it'd be in that area, but it'd be before the dikes.
Okay, so we're not, by the time it gets to the dikes, there's no extra water.
Yep.
Correct.
Brian, I would also maybe ask the commission to entertain Lindsay Urban, our city engineer, is here. I don't know if you have any questions or comments. Brian, you might let Lindsay speak to this.
Yeah, you're welcome to. Do you have any updates from last time we spoke?
No, I think what we have seen, this isn't your site plan review, but there's Spencer Pond and some other things addressed in the interval. I won't go into that tonight, but this does help, I think, frame what's going on, at least at that location. And I think Tyler's questions are Corps of Engineer related because the Corps has called me and we've had a conversation about how they can get the data that they need to make a judgment relative to the levees, and that's the St. Paul office. And so if they can have your results, I think that would be helpful for them to provide a result.
Yeah, and as we do this work all across the state, and we share our models with qualified users, so we have shared models back and forth with the Corps, the USGS, other state and federal agencies. So what we have here is really for the city to use as they need to use it.
I do have one additional question. So the city's sewer treatment facility is more or less
Downstream.
Our neighbor downstream. There was some concern with us adding storage pond / borrow area. Water getting from the river to that treatment area as sort of path of least resistance, but I just want to clarify from what you were saying, the water in that area is much slower moving, so it's not going to rush through our site and pond to that spot?
Like build up?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't anticipate any sort of buildup. I mean, the energy in the river, again, in the main channel, there's a lot of energy in the river. Out in this floodplain where we're going to be, a couple of feet per second, there's not enough energy in that velocity to build water up per se. There is, some change in floodplain roughness. It's currently agriculture, so it's slightly rougher. It's still a very flat area. It's not a riparian forest, where, we've got a lot of woody vegetation out there, restricting flow, and then you come in and clear that all out, clean it out, where you'd increase velocities. Relatively smooth today. Where the borrow pit area, it's going to be a little smoother. The project itself is built up, right now about 4 to 5 feet above the base flood elevation, so we don't expect water up on the parking area under the regulated, 100-year condition. So I don't see too much change there.
So there shouldn't be any less resistance towards the sewer treatment plant?
I don't think so.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question just on the distinction between the floodway and the floodway fringe. Right, that's helpful to have that map up there. This is based on data from 2010, so that does include the 2008 flood in its expectations.
Yeah, and so this is, again, it's modeled data, and so what the modeler does is the modeler continues to take the river cross-section and basically fill it up with fill material all the way out until the edge of this hatched area. And the river will continue to rise as we fill that up all the way to the edge, and as you get closer, it rises faster. And at the point where this black boundary is drawn at the edge of the hatching, the river is now risen 1 foot. Okay, so any building inside of that is going to result in, that main channel, which is called the surcharge. So we're at a 1 foot surcharge, would result in that the water level coming up even more than 1 foot. Some jurisdictions have decided, rather than adopt the statewide standard, which is, no rise greater than 1 foot, they've gone to a no rise condition. Okay, where, they're going to set their floodway boundaries out further and say, well, we don't want any rise whatsoever. And that's that's a more restrictive condition.
Okay. And then my follow-up to that is that the floodway is defined kind of by that model, not necessarily where the river may channel now.
Absolutely. Okay. So this is an engineering calculation that's done. It's part of a national flood insurance rate map program to define where these boundaries are. That's very different than looking out and saying geologically this is where the floodplain is. Okay, the floodplain is quite different. You can look out there and I can point to and on these aerial images look at where the floodplain is. That's different than the floodway.
Can I ask one more question? Is that okay, Frank?
Yeah, I'll open it up. Okay, go ahead.
So in your first photos, you kind of showed the 2008 flood and where it was raining in that photograph graph. Do a lot of the big floods like that 2008 flood or what we just saw in Ankeny, are those kind of caused by perfect storms? 8 inches in an hour right on that spot?
Well, I think that's we also have done another study that's looked at the number of FEMA disaster declarations in Iowa over about the last 30 years, and we're almost 1,000 FEMA disaster declarations from flooding in Iowa over the last 30 years. And so when we think about this, and the point that we've made to state leadership is that, when you think about, presidential disaster declaration, that should be a really unique thing, right? That should be, the flood of a lifetime. We've had 1,000 in this state in the last 30 years. And so we're doing something wrong. Okay, that we've got that kind of damage that's happening, and so I don't think it's acceptable for us to keep saying, well, that was just a perfect storm. What happened in Ankeny a couple weeks ago? That was they had an inch of rain in 9 minutes with accumulations over 10 and 12 and 14 inches. Well, that was an extreme event, but I would caution anybody to say that was a perfect storm, because we're seeing that type of event happening too frequently, resulting in this, nearly 1,000 presidential disaster declarations. Concerns that we have in some of the work that we're doing in this watershed project is taking storms like this and moving them in the watershed. So what if that storm that I showed, what if that was 40 miles to the west and 20 miles to the north? We would have had a much bigger disaster in the city of Decorah and in Freeport. Of course, if it was, likewise, if it was 40 miles further to the east, we wouldn't have even had, anything of memory for the communities. Now, something would happen in the lower upper Iowa, but be a little careful about calling things perfect storms. So.
I have two questions.
Please state your name for the record and address.
My name is Kevin Lee from Freeport. I have two questions. What reason do we have a floodplain? And then the other question is that if you look at the GIS in Iowa and reflect back to the mapping in the 1850s and then progress forward, I think in so many decades, you can see that the channel changes considerably. And does any of your modeling inclusive with those channel changes? Because I think it's changing now.
Yeah, and so, we have, channel cross-sections that go into the model that represent the channel today or in the last year or so. We haven't done anything on the upper Iowa to look at, historically how the channel has moved in the last 10 years or 20 years or 100 years. And as you mentioned, there is a very big there is a clear, to me, a difference between the floodplain and this floodway. So the floodway is a regulatory element of flood mapping. The floodplain is this natural geologic area in which that river moved back and forth, through geologic time in communities and across the state. As we've developed our state, we've pinned those rivers down. And so in many cases, because of bridge openings, urban development, residential development, and even agricultural use, we've pinned the planform of the river down. And so that river that used to define its own geometry over, the millennia, now is pinned down. And so it, in many cases, because it's pinned down and it's not allowed to move out and dissipate energy but through bank erosion, a lot of rivers are degrading. So we see the channel bed going down, yet we're seeing these greater magnitude floods. And so even though the channel bed is going down, we're still getting, a lot of water spilling out onto those floodplains. So,
so that it actually becomes more channelized and more development.
Oftentimes, and again, we can't say that, across every single situation, but quite often we have more runoff, which I described. So on sort of the annual average flow, we've got more water in the channel, so that has more energy in it. Because we're not allowing it to move back and forth, oftentimes the channels are degrading. Here in northeast Iowa, we have, rock that's very near the surface. So we've got a lot of hard points out there where we might already be down to rock, and that river might not be able to degrade much more, albeit very, very slowly over very long periods of time.
But in the Menard site and down through Freeport, there's probably 10 feet of sedimentary there that before you even hit any hard rock. I guess what my concern with in Freeport is that the channel is changing, it's moving southward, and you can see behind the county farm where there's, in this last little episode a few weeks ago, there's a big channel type, rush of water heading directly at Freeport. Will development encroaching upon that channel make the velocity faster and edge the banks that are naturally trying to hold the flood back?
Again, on a particular site, I would say that, we put one project out there, the impacts are very small. The question is, do we want to be developing the entire floodplain? Do we want, that's a community question, that's a council question, that's not a question that I can answer for you. I can say for this particular project, it's about 1.5 inch rise. If you wanted to go and do intensive development across the floodplain, there'll be, an effect to that.
Will the water go faster though, even though it goes up a little?
Here, really, because we're not going to change the discharge. We have a pinch point at the Freeport Bridge, so everything is going through that bridge opening. Although we had this volume of 1.7 million cubic feet taken out of the storage, that the discharge in cubic feet per second really doesn't change, so the velocity won't change.
No change in velocity?
No.
Thank you.
Yes.
Chad, I'm curious, has Mr. Weber, is that correct?
Yes.
Weber, was this memo shared with Mr. Weber? And
Yes, it was. And all the three latest documents I've received from Tyler I sent to Larry. That includes the updated overall site plan, muted site plan, I think that you were sharing, Tyler, with the Army Corps, and then this letter from Menards Engineering Firm I did share
did
with
you
Larry.
have any thoughts?
No, I don't have any thoughts on that tonight.
Brian Jupiter. If we were to
Name and address, please.
cross
Sorry.
402 Michigan Avenue, if we were to, or the city were to put prairie grass in the floodway versus mowing or whatnot, because we have quite a bit of green space within the floodway in the city prior to the Clay Hill Road Bridge. Would that more effectively slow water than cutting it home clear?
So, I want to comment on, and I'm going to have a hard time speaking into this thing so people can hear me. So if we put prairie grass into the floodway, so it's a fairly narrow strip right along the edge of the river. Prairie grasses at a time of a flood are going to, be laid flat pretty quickly. So there's going to be, I would say, relatively little resistance by those prairie grasses. So I don't think that's going to slow the water down. If that area was heavily forested, then it would slow the water down, but it would back it up as well. So that would cause an increase in stage upstream. Putting prairie grasses into the floodplain, into the floodway, could result in some increased infiltration, but that would only be beneficial under relatively low channel conditions, because again, once the river comes up and spills out of its river channel itself, there's the entire soil column is saturated, so we wouldn't get much benefit there. Prairie grasses, in terms of holding water back, increasing infiltration, are a fantastic practice to do upland, holding water back where the rainfall is happening, probably not providing much flood mitigation or benefit along the channel itself. Did that answer your question?
I'm Philip Iverson. I live at 303 West Broadway here in Decorah. In one of your earlier slides, you showed data showing increases in rainfall over time. I assume your modeling in the Menards area assumed current rainfall levels. I'm curious what your model would show if you ran it with increased rainfall levels, say 10, 20, 50 years from now.
So again, just as a clarification, what we do is based on stream flow conditions, we calculate this return period flow, the Q100 and the Q500, and those have changed over time. And so we're running it with the current Q500 and current Q100.
So I restate my question with stream flow.
Right. So we haven't done that. If we, and again, in some studies that we're working on in Iowa with other communities, they've asked us to say, well, what happens if we see an increase of the Q100 or the Q500, say 25%, or some thresholds, and then we can run those models. We have not done that today.
I'd suggest that would be useful information in this case.
George Hagan, I have a similar question. The backwater curves from those restrictions at the bridges there, as the flow increases, the backwater curves are going to go upriver, aren't they?
Well, they will go upriver some distance, but again, for a particular site, we haven't taken, we haven't increased the discharge. What we've done is we've taken 1.7 million cubic feet, and we take that, and I haven't done we could do a volumetric calculation of the volume of water from 2008 or from 2016, over that period, and it would be, thousands of times greater than that. So we're not increasing the discharge by taking that small amount of floodplain storage out from that single project.
Any other questions?
Paul Scott, 405 East Broadway. Will you have this posted on your website, or what other ways can the general public access this study?
So I've provided it to the commission tonight.
City has it.
I have the slides. We'll talk to the commission about how they'd like to present those or make those available publicly. Certainly, they'd be available for inspection if anybody wants to come in and see them. Okay, Larry, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very informational. Okay, I guess what's our next step?
I didn't have anything else on the agenda. My intent with this information was for you to take it under advisement, think on it. If you want to see the slides, we'll get your copies. And then be prepared to discuss further August 13th at your next meeting. With that, I would recommend you adjourn.
So moved. Second. Any other? Everybody the same feeling?
Same feeling.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming.